Hello and welcome to Technically Speaking, where scientists and engineers come together to chat about a common interest, share knowledge and satisfy some curiosity. I'm Ellie and I'm joined by Laura to talk about fungus and how it relates to medicine. Laura, you brought this to my attention. How did this come across your very intelligent mind?
Thank you. Around about Christmas time, I was just kind of browsing through socials and email newsletters, and things kept coming up about fungus that made me think, what? How is this such a big thing in medicine that people don't know a lot about? So it's got me interested, and I tend to think of fungus as being mushrooms that I eat and things that grow in the woods, so I thought, I have to know more about the medical side of it now.
I admit I had no idea there was a medical side to fungus until you brought this topic up, but I am intrigued and curious as ever. And like you said, I was very much in the mushrooms growing in the forest camp of fungus. But I've done a little bit of research, and it turns out that all mushrooms are fungus, but not all fungus are mushrooms.
Yeah, I think when I was reading into it, I thought yeast. Could I not have thought of yeast as a fungus? I use that all the time. I bake sourdough every week.
Yeah, fungus is a very broad group of things, including the funguses, the mushrooms, the yeasts, the slime moulds, which if you've never Googled slime moulds, I highly recommend because they are really funky.
No, I hope that's not a thing in medicine now. That doesn't sound pleasant.
I imagine not. I mean, maybe we'll discover it soon, but as far as I understand, slime moulds in medicine are not currently a hot topic.
Good.
Yes. Mushrooms have a stalk and a fun cap, like very much the emoji of a mushroom, whereas fungus can look completely different and look very strange and also be microscopic, which is quite fun.
Which then I guess feeds into infections in the human body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I now have a face cream that includes some sort of acid that is produced by yeast that live naturally on your skin. So I obviously am aware that there is fungus associated with the human body, albeit not mushroomy fungus.
Not tasty fungus.
Yeah, but I hadn't really considered much else. I guess blue cheese as well, I should mention that, because I really like blue cheese. So I like fungusy things to eat.
Yeah, that's a mould, I think. Blue cheese is a mould, which is a fungus, but is also its own, subdivision.
Yes.
Yeah. I think most people think of, yeast infections in a negative way as well, like fungus causing things like fungal nail infections, athlete's foot, all that sort of thing. So yeah, fungus in the human body probably has a lot more to it than we imagined.
Yeah, and I guess that ties into one of the big news stories that I saw. I thought it was big anyway, which was about redesigning an antifungal drug, because apparently it's really toxic to people. It just happens to be slightly more toxic to the fungus. And they looked at the mechanism of how it acts on the fungus and on the human body, and then modified its structure so it was less toxic to humans, but still had some effect on the fungus. And I thought, that's cool.
That is cool. I appreciate that. It's like side effects, right? So you're getting rid of the fungal infection, but you also feel really rubbish. But I guess they've improved it so that you don't feel quite so bad.
So the drug or the molecule is called amphotericin B, and it has a short-term effect of flu-like symptoms, but then long-term it's hideously toxic to the kidneys.
Oh.
So what it does, it forms this porous medium that extracts the cholesterol from the kidneys and just stops them from functioning.
That sounds horrible.
Exactly. But then it also sounds like some fungal infections are incredibly terrible and kill about, I think it's 1.5 million people worldwide annually.
Wow. That's surprisingly high.
I didn't think it was that high either. So it's either definitely be killed by the fungus, it sounds like, or maybe be killed by the treatment.
I mean, neither of those sound like great options. I'm surprised fungus is so high because I feel like we always hear about viruses, we always hear about bacterial infections, but we never hear about, this person's got a really serious fungal infection.
No, again, you tend to think of things like athlete's foot, which people aren't too bothered about. But it sounds like they tend to infect people who have already immunocompromised in some way. So they're already not well because they're, having cancer treatment or something, or recovering from major surgery. And
then the immune system is not so hot at that time.
Exactly, yeah. So if you inhale some, spores or something from the fungus, there you go.
Well, that's another 2024 bingo card. Horrible fungal infection. But they've improved it, so at least it's a little bit of a positive spin.
One of the reasons it's not improved so much is because in comparison to other things like viruses and bacteria, it doesn't affect as many people in as terrible a way. So although it kills a lot of people, it's still pretty niche. I
mean, to be fair, 1.5 million annually probably isn't that high compared to all the big hitters that we hear about more often. It's still bad, but I guess it could be more deadly. I'm not sure what I'm advocating for here.
No.
More awareness of better fungal treatment.
Get two women that are tired to talk about bacterial and fungal infections, and it takes a fairly dystopian turn. This was on the journal Nature. It was on their podcast a few months ago, and they were saying there's still more work to do. So they've tested it on human cells in a dish in the lab, and they've also done some tests in rodents in the lab. But they need to look at the longer term effects and the more widespread effects. Obviously, just some cells in the lab, they'll behave in one way, but the human body is way more complicated and could behave in other ways.
Absolutely. So it's not going to be coming to market anytime soon.
Doesn't sound like it, but it does sound very hopeful. So they understand the mechanism better for a start, and they know that what it does to the fungus is it extracts a molecule that's similar to the cholesterol that's in the kidneys. Ergo sterile, I think it is. So it extracts that from the fungus's membrane, and then the membrane just kind of can't function anymore. It just falls apart. So it's a similar mechanism to how viruses can be killed.
That does sound positive, that the more they know, the better treatments they can make, and the more they can then understand about different properties that could help. Yeah, I feel good about this in general.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that got to me so much, is that they've known about this drug for a while and they know how terrible it is. But they had to go to this level of detail to look at exactly how these mechanisms work and exactly how the structure of the molecules affects what's coming out of the biological samples to figure out what's going on. And I think that's the way science is going, isn't it? It requires that incredible level of detail to figure out, well, what next? How can we improve this?
Really drilling down. So, moving on then to cancer and fungus, which I also didn't realise was a thing. You'll find out, everyone, that this is quite a mind-blowing episode to me. But I also didn't realise that lots of other people didn't know, which made me feel slightly better. So we only discovered this in 2019, that there are fungi inside cancers, which I think is absolutely bizarre.
This was the other thing that popped up on my social media around about Christmas time. It was just something on Twitter, like a one-liner of, we have found this new thing in more detail. And I thought, what? There is fungus living in cancers? I did not know this. More people should know this.
More people should know this. How did they find this out? Were they looking? Were treating cancers and, they do biopsies and remove tumours and all sorts, and then looked closer and were like, holy moly, there's some fungi in here.
So I found that research paper from 2019, and I don't think they were actually the first research group to observe this. They just set their study up in a different way to others. So there are a few research papers from earlier on that were like, we've analysed DNA from breast cancer, say, and we found all these markers for a microbiome. So not just bacteria or viruses, but we found fungus in there as well, or markers for fungus, I should say.
Right.
But then this 2019 study was looking at pancreatic cancer. And there's obviously fungus living in your gut. Quite happily, some of it's meant to be there. It's good for you.
Which I also didn't know. This is going to just be me on repeat like a broken record. I didn't know this.
Yeah, but apparently to scientists in that field, it's quite well known and they're not too surprised by it.
Okay, there's fungus living in my guts. That's fine. I'm making my peace with that.
But so what they were wondering is, can the fungus also get into the pancreas, and what effect does that have on cancer? So this was a study that they did using mice, I think, in very controlled environments. So they would give them antifungal drugs. It's the same, it's amphotericin B, which I just talked about. So I was wondering what the effect on the mice was if it damages your kidneys.
Yeah.
I assume they wiped out all the fungus that were living in the mice and then carefully reintroduced a certain type of fungus to see whether different fungi had different effects.
Right.
And I think that one got a lot of interest because they were also saying the fungus seemed to cause cancer, which has since been disproven in that particular type of cancer.
Oh.
Yeah, as I say, there were a few studies beforehand that said, yeah, we found markers for fungi in these different cancers. We don't really know how they got there.
Is it worse? Like, if you've got breast cancer, obviously that's terrible in the first place, but if you've got breast cancer and fungus in your breast cancer tumours, is that like more dangerous, more aggressive, or do we not know yet?
There is still research ongoing to figure out exactly what. So there were things like they tended to observe it more in people over 50, I think.
Okay. That's interesting.
There have been so many studies on different types. There was a study a year or two ago that looked at 35 different types of cancer. So they collected over 17,000 samples from patients and analysed them to see what fungus is associated with what sort of cancer. And are there any other different groupings like age, whether you smoke, how you respond to various therapeutic treatments? It sounds really, really complicated.
Yeah.
So I didn't look at all the different types because I think that would have made my brain melt.
Oh, that would have taken ages.
Yeah. The big thing is they don't really know exactly how it gets there, and they don't know necessarily whether it always has a good effect or always has a bad effect. It depends. But I think the key point is now that they know this, they can look at it in more detail and consider fungi as part of how you would treat the cancer.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you were saying about those improved antifungal drugs, if you're also then having chemotherapy and all the rest of it, can you whack some antifungals into the mix to help, shrink your tumour or make you have improved outcomes?
It sounds like it. It's already a thing for bacteria, apparently. Again, I didn't know this, but they do sometimes give antibacterial agents to people with certain cancers because they know that the bacteria tend to locate in the tumour and have potentially protective effects for the tumour.
I mean, I get it in terms of like a fungus would or a bacteria would go to a tumour because they like often have a lot of high blood flow and they are taking a lot of resources from the body. If it was like almost parasitic in a way, that it would be mining nutrients from the tumour itself.
That was the impression I got. As I said, they don't entirely know how they get there. There's an idea that the fungus is transported through the bloodstream. And then obviously it gets to a place it must like. So it hangs out there and it's kind of protected there. So the body's immune system can't get to it, which it normally would.
I suppose, yeah, that's also true because a tumour is obviously then sort of outside the body's immune system, like it's still growing sort of thing. And the person is getting iller. And then if they're travelling in the bloodstream, they would end up there and then they are protected from the immune system and they've got access to all the blood flow and the nutrients. So, yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah, there's still this idea that, I guess this is why it's currently being researched, because this is a really new idea, that the fungus helps promote cancer growth. But then it has to get there to begin with and, I don't know, start some sort of colony. I don't know if that really is likely or if it is more what we're thinking, whether there's the tumour first. And the fungus says, oh, this is quite a nice place to hang out.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued how the two would be interlinked, unless the fungus that you had anyway was then damaging your cells in some way, which would then lead potentially to a cancer. But I don't know how that would work. I wouldn't know enough about how they would interact.
No, I mean, there's an example from cervical cancer in women. There's a virus, isn't it? That's what they look for when they do that test on you. They're looking for the virus.
For HPV?
Yeah, that can cause, I think it's a change in the genes of the cells in your cervix.
Yeah, I believe so.
So if viruses can promote cancer, then could the fungus? But I think I should point out this seems like it's quite a rare thing.
Yes.
And there's still a lot of research ongoing. So this is just us like crazy speculation.
Yes, we're not doctors. Well, Laura is, but not a medical doctor.
Yeah, don't take medical advice from someone with a PhD in computational chemistry.
So I find it mind-blowing as well that we have fungus in the gut and in our bodies anyway, which I know I shouldn't because I've done actually quite a lot of research this year into the microbiome and the fact that we have all these sort of bacterias and everything living in our bodies all the time. And it can really affect your health. But I never considered fungus as part of that sort of flora of things that are living in your intestines.
No, do you think that's because, going back to what we were saying up top, it's because we tend to think of fungus as just the mushrooms that you get in the garden?
I think it must be. Like fungus and medicine are two words that I have not previously considered before in any context, despite like obviously knowing things like athlete's foot and stuff and like fungal nail infections is like a general thing that's in the world. I read as well that it's a lot smaller, so you have like thousands of species of bacteria and stuff living in you, but there's way less of a percentage of that is fungus. So maybe that's why it's not so well studied or popular knowledge in the same way.
It might be worth, maybe this is a future episode, but looking at the differences between bacteria and fungi to understand why the bacteria may be more commonplace in the human body.
Yeah, I still think of fungus as too much like a plant, so I'm like astonished that it can survive. Like you say, it's like surviving in cancer cells and stuff, but I'm like, there's no sunlight. Like, how is it doing this? But obviously it's a completely different mechanism. And also, I don't think of fungus as tiny. I don't think of microscopic fungus. I think of like mushrooms that you buy from Sainsbury's.
Maybe there needs to be more of a, rather than just showing that mushroom emoji every time someone says something to do with fungus, we need to have a bit of a switch in how we refer to it.
Yeah, I think we do. I think fungus is one of those really like strange things. Like we don't really know that much about it comparatively, especially compared to like bacteria and viruses. I feel like we need more mycologists to come to the fore and tell us more.
And I guess this is where some of the research is going, because it sounds like it is a relatively understudied thing in comparison to the bacteria, which I guess is because the fungi are less widespread.
Yeah.
I think there are only like certain types that tend to infect people rather than the bacteria, where it could be pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And
true.
especially because bacteria, I think, can jump from, I'm thinking of viruses, aren't I? Can jump from one species to another, like with COVID-19.
Oh, the mutations over and over. Well, bacteria do that too.
Yeah, whereas fungi just tend to be, they come out of the environment and that's it. They can't jump between creatures usually.
Well, maybe they can. Maybe that's what we're. Maybe that's what we don't know.
That's why I ended that sentence with usually, because I wouldn't want to say absolutely not, because I don't know. It's an unstudied thing.
Yeah. And also because we're finding out more and more about how the gut bacteria influence like mental health diseases and stuff, and like whether certain bacteria present in your gut are like an indicator that you might have Alzheimer's down the line, or all these sorts of things. Or you can have inflammatory depression caused by certain bacteria, or like definitely compounded by bacteria. And if you treat that with anti-inflammatories, people see like a huge improvement because effectively you've helped kill some of the things that's compounding your symptoms. So I wonder then if you could treat it with a similar approach, like if you could change the microbiota within you, would you then have like less chance of developing a certain cancer in the first place?
And then I guess you'd have to look at how far do you take it. So I really like the idea of if you change something in your gut, that can change your mental health for the good.
Yeah.
Imagine if all these people that are depressed and don't really have a reason for being depressed, like they can't figure out what the source is, it's suddenly, oh, you just need to alter your gut bacteria, start eating these foods.
Have some kombucha.
Suddenly people are a lot happier. And that's all it took, because of this incredibly detailed way of understanding the human body and all the myriad interactions of things that live in it.
Yeah. Isn't that insane? It's still mind-blowing to me. If anyone wants to read a book about this, The Immune Mind by Dr. Monty Lyman, I interviewed him for work and he was absolutely fascinating. But his book is all about the interactions between the gut and the mind and mental health. And he is a medical doctor, so we can trust him much more than you can trust me and Laura.
Yeah, so if mine and Ellie's job is to interview the scientists that work on these things day in, day out, we can translate some of that information for you, but go to the source for 100%, this is what it is.
Go to the source. So, yeah, and I guess then it comes on to treatment, doesn't it? If we kill the cancer, are you killing the fungus? Or does it then retreat back into wherever it came from? Is it the same fungus that was living peaceably in your gut the whole time before you got sick? Or is it like a different mutation? I guess funguses can mutate, surely. They must grow quite rapidly.
Yeah, they must evolve somehow. So, presumably, but is it likely just because you've removed the thing that it's been living in? I think not.
We need to know more about the interactions, I think. Like, how interlinked are they? Is it just living there because it's a nice place to live? Or is it involved in the disease in a way that we didn't think it was?
My mind's sort of reeling with, well, how would you figure out what came first? It's one of those chicken and egg things that science will eventually solve.
Yeah, I guess if we only found out that this was a thing sort of late teens, 20 teens, then 20 years from now maybe we'll have much more of a clue about how it's all related.
Reading into what is already out there on this, there were a lot of articles that were really making the point that having fungi around isn't necessarily a problem. You are not definitely going to get cancer because there is this fungus somewhere and you should take drastic measures to avoid it. They were very much saying it is nothing to be concerned by. Scientists are sciencing to figure out more though.
Yeah, it's the same thing, isn't it? We have 700 species of bacteria living in our mouths. And that is not inherently bad. That's just the way the human body is. But a good oral hygiene is important, everyone. So brush your teeth.
This gets onto a probably slightly different topic. Like, the human body is evolved to combat a whole different range of stuff constantly attacking it from the natural world, right?
Yeah.
And then humans decide that we're going to start applying all these cleaning products to everything and try and eradicate all this stuff that is perceived to be bad, which just makes it worse sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. If you're, Dettol says wipes out 99.9% of bacteria, that's fine, I suppose, but not necessarily all the bacteria we need to wipe out.
Creates this interesting thing as the 1% that's left. Is that really resistant and then really hard to tackle?
Or did you just not wipe behind the kettle properly?
Probably more likely that, to be honest. But if it doesn't have those other bacteria and whatever else to compete with for resources, it'll just get stronger and stronger, and then you're creating a problem. I say clean less.
Yeah. That's the hot takeaway from this episode. Clean less, but do brush your teeth.
Pretty much. I mean, there's way more to go at with cancer and challenges surrounding that, because there are things to do with like genetic factors as well, aren't there?
Oh yeah, I mean, no cancer is just one treatment fits all. Every body is going to respond differently to different treatments. But I am going to keep an eye on this. I feel like this is super interesting.
Oh, well, I'm glad I could bring it to your attention and give you a new hobby.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to be silently reading fungus and cancer papers for the next 10 years, see what happens.
Yeah, or maybe at least the summaries, because trying to read some of these papers, I mean, you would really need to have studied it for years. There is a lot of jargon.
That is my pet peeve with papers. I don't need jargon. If you tell me that you've discovered, because I read a lot of animal papers and like dinosaur discoveries and all this sort of thing. If you've told me you've discovered a new species and it's got a big head and the head is 2 meters long, just write that. Just write that one sentence. That is all I need to know. I don't need, like, measurements of the jaw and this, that and the other, and the orbits are twice as big as this other specimen you found 10 years ago. I try to care. I really do, but I can't.
It does kind of give people like us a job for life, though, of translating this jargony stuff into something more engaging for a wider audience.
Yeah, that literally is my job. So actually, maybe I don't want the the one sentence summary.
And at the same time, it would be nice if science were made more accessible in that way. And I'm sure we'd still have plenty of work to do.
Yes, absolutely. We'd always find something to talk about. Well, I think we've probably drifted off topic just enough, seeing as I've managed to bring up dinosaurs in a fungus cancer episode. But that has been absolutely fascinating. I have learnt many things that I did not know previously. And I think it's really cool that we have fungus living in our bodies. And hopefully, the more we look into new drugs, the more we look into their relationship to cancers, the better treatments can be made and sought out and tested. And we'll find out more things all the time. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you for our next episode.
The views expressed in this podcast belong entirely to the person that said them. They do not represent any industry or organisation. If you enjoyed listening to these views, it would really help us out if you could rate us, leave a review and tell a friend. This podcast was sponsored by no one, but if you're interested in funding us to continue to have frank discussions about science and engineering, please get in touch.